Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and today I'm starting a really fun video. I'm gonna do a little experiment. I'm gonna read a whole bunch of space books to find out if that's a trope I like within sci-fi, if there are certain sub-tropes within that trope, and just further refine my tastes when it comes to sci-fi books. So if you like space books, or you think you might like space books, stay tuned because I am going to be reading 6 of them and letting you know which ones I liked, which ones I would recommend, and if I will continue picking up space books in the future. Before I get into the books that I want to read or I'm going to read, let's talk about the space books that I've read in the past and previously enjoyed, because I do consider space books to be something that I really love. First of all, Andy Weir has 3 space novels that I have absolutely loved. I gave all of them 5 stars. His books are The Martian, which takes place on Mars, Artemis, which takes place on the moon, and Project Hail Mary, which just came out this last year and takes place out in just open space. I will 100% pick up any sci-fi book that Andy Weir writes in the future, but especially if it's space-based, I just think he does it so well. His science is so sound, his situations that he has his main characters in are so exciting, and his characters themselves are really funny, and I like that humor within the sci-fi to kind of balance out the dismal situations that usually the main characters are in. I also loved the book called Do You Dream of Terra 2 by Temi O. This is a young adult sci-fi book about this group of kids or teens who have been selected and have been training and are now going on this mission to occupy another planet called Terra 2, and the journey is so long that these kids are going to be adults by the time they get there, and they are going to be the founders of this new world. So they're leaving their old life behind, and it's all about them on that journey and interacting with each other, and I just really loved it because it took young adult characters but put them into a very serious and adult situation, and they were basically the adults, and I never hear people talking about that book, so I would love to get it on more people's radar. Illuminae is a space book that I've read. I didn't love this book as much as everyone else seems to love it, and I'm not sure why. This is a mixed media book, so it's really cool to flip through. The pages have like illustrations, or the words are written in really interesting ways on the pages. I think the story itself just didn't resonate with me. It was a little bit too unrealistic and too like sci-fi for me, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but I prefer sci-fi to be as close to real world as possible, and I think that one was just a little bit too like space battle-y for me. And looking through my sci-fi list on Goodreads, that's pretty much it for space books, so that's why I want to read more of them. So I've got 6 space books here. To be completely honest, I don't know much about most of them. I've just seen a lot of them around. A couple of them were recommended to me, so we're just gonna give them a shot and see what sticks. The first one is a book that I have seen the cover in bookstores and libraries and everywhere, and it's just been like calling to me like, hey, you need to read this book, even though I know nothing about it. It's called Holdout by Jeffrey Kluger. I love the themes that you're gonna be seeing on the book covers of space books, how it's always like a solo astronaut floating in space or with space in the background, and that's of course what this is. Let's read the synopsis together, shall we? Veteran American astronaut Belka Wally Beckwith didn't plan it this way. When a freak accident befalls the International Space Station and injures her and the 2 other astronauts on board, Russian cosmonauts who are keen on following the rules, NASA and Roscosmos, that must be the Russian organization, order all astronauts to abandon ship immediately. In an unprecedented breach of command, Wally refuses to return to Earth, and as her fellow astronauts blast off towards home, the trajectory of her life veers dramatically off course. So, sounds like we may have a female astronaut trapped alone in space. Sounds good to me. I'm definitely down for that ride. Another one that I've just seen everywhere and I wanted to pick up because the title is intriguing to me is The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. This is not an astronaut in space. This is some kind of spacecraft in space on the cover. Let's read what this one is about. I think I remember seeing on Goodreads that this is like a space sci-fi thriller, which is intriguing. It says NASA is about to launch Apollo 18. While the mission has been billed as a scientific one, the flight controller Kaz Zemekis knows there is a darker objective. Intelligence has discovered a secret Soviet space station spying on America, and Apollo 18 may be the only chance to stop it. But even as Kaz races to keep the NASA crew one step ahead of their Russian rivals, a deadly accident reveals that not everyone involved is quite who they were thought to be. With political stakes stretched to the breaking point, the White House and the Kremlin can only watch as their astronauts collide on the lunar surface, far beyond the reach of law rescue. I'm a little bit less intrigued by this one, to be honest, because it mentioned a political subplot. So we'll see if this catches my attention and keeps it. This one is quite long, like almost 500 pages. So we'll see, but still had to check it out. And then the next one is a book that I recently saw on Gabby's channel. She did a reading vlog reading sci-fi books, and I had not heard of this book before then, but it's Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton. I remember her saying that this is about a world where people can clone people, and we're following the 7th iteration of this person named Mickey. After several deaths punctuating a series of all too brief lifespans, a clone reassesses his purpose and his humanity in Edward Ashton's Mickey 7. Mickey Barnes is an expendable, now on a 7th iteration, living and dying among his fellow colonists on the near uninhabitable ice world of Niflheim. Some consider him immortal, others believe he's a soulless monstrosity. For the past 9 years, he has been deployed for hazardous assignments and subjected to experiments that test the limits of human endurance, his humanity sacrificed for the greater good. I believe Gabby had overall good things to say about this, so I am intrigued. It is less than 300 pages, so this will be nice to get more of a short form sci-fi space book. Then we've got a book that was recommended by a neighbor of mine. She knows I like sci-fi, and she enjoyed this book when she read it. It's called Waypoint Kangaroo by Curtis C. Chen. I believe this is part of a duology, and let's read what it says. Kangaroo isn't your typical spy. Sure, he has extensive agency training, access to bleeding edge technology, and a ready supply of quips and retorts. But what sets him apart is the pocket, a portal that opens into an empty, seemingly infinite parallel universe. Kangaroo is the only person in the world who can use the pocket, and he's pretty sure his agency keeps him around only to exploit this superpower for their own purposes. I love multiple universe stories, so very excited to get to this one. This one came out in 2016. If you were curious, I believe the 3 previous books were all relatively new releases, probably in 2021 or 2022. Then we've got a much older release. This is a book that I was talking about reading space books on one of Gwen's most recent live shows, and someone in the comments recommended this book and said that they read it something like 10 years ago and it still sticks with them. So I was like, okay, gotta read that. This book was published in 1999, which is kind of crazy. It's Gravity by Tess Gerritsen. I know nothing about the synopsis, but based on that commenter's recommendation, I thought I would give it a chance. So let's read it. Emma Watson. That's hilarious that the main character is named Emma Watson, obviously before the actress came to be famous. But it says, Emma Watson, a brilliant research physician, has been training for the mission of a lifetime to study living beings in space. Jack McCallum, Emma's estranged husband, has shared her dream of space travel, but a medical condition has grounded and embittered him. He must watch from the sidelines as his wife prepares for her first mission to the International Space Station. That sounds super good. I love the husband and wife dynamics there, and the wife being the one to kind of take control and be in a position of prominence. So I'm actually more excited to read this one now after knowing the synopsis. And I hope that it does live up to that recommendation. And then the last book that I'm going to be reading is another recent edition. My friend Gwen reminded me that Kayla from Books and Lala recently read this in a reading vlog, and she liked it. It's called The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer. This is a young adult sci-fi book, which I am intrigued by. It says, 2 boys alone in space. After the first settler on Titan trips her distress signal, neither remaining country on Earth can afford to scramble a rescue of its own, and so 2 sworn enemies are installed in the same spaceship. Ambrose wakes up on the coordinated endeavor with no memory of a launch. There's more that doesn't add up. Evidence indicates strangers have been on board. The ship's operating system is voiced by his mother, and his handsome, brooding shipmate has barricaded himself away. Nothing will stop Ambrose from making his mission succeed, though, not when the settler he's rescuing is his own sister. I'm hoping that this one is emotional and impactful even for a YA story. I think that this one will have some good conversations, so I'm excited to have a young adult option to mix in here. So these are the 6 books that I will be reading for this video. I'm gonna do this a little bit different than I do my normal reading vlogs. I don't think I'm gonna do any midpoint check-ins because this is a lot of books to get through, and I want to discuss the books after I finish them and give you really in-depth thoughts. So I think I'm just gonna come back once I've finished each book and keep it moving without too much b-roll or intermittent talking. So I will be back once I have finished my first book. I also think I'm going to try to spread these out throughout the next month or so. I don't want to read 6 space books back to back to back. I think I will just get burnt out of it, and that will do a real disservice to the books that I read later on. So that's the plan. I'm gonna get to reading, and I will let you know when I finish my first book and when I have something to tell you about.
Losing time, I'm fading fast. I just wanna make it last. Try to let go of the past. I close my eyes, embrace the blast. Sleepless nights and headaches stack. Restlessness to hell and
Hi you guys, I am here with my first update. I finished my first book, so let's talk about it. I finished Waypoint Kangaroo by Curtis C. Chen. This one I picked up first because it was a recommendation from my friend and neighbor Lisa. Hi Lisa. She read this book and thought I would like it for a couple different reasons. She knows I've been reading a lot more sci-fi lately. She and I both really enjoy Andy Weir's space books, and this book also has like a mystery subplot, and she told me that she thought I would really enjoy that also. So I was very excited to take this recommendation and start this book. The general synopsis is we are following this main character called Kangaroo, and he's called Kangaroo because he has this special ability to like open a pocket of deep space where he can like put stuff and then access it later. So it's literally like right next to him. He can open up this portal that's like this ginormous pocket for him to put like weapons or tools or whatever it is, close it up, and then no matter where he is later, he can open it up and use those things. So he's called Kangaroo because of that pouch, and he is a spy for this agency. What's interesting is we don't get a lot of information about that because we're actually following him on vacation from his normal job. Basically, he's very like off the wall, and something's going on with his agency that they don't trust him to be around. So they're like, here, go on vacation, take a month off, let us handle this stuff. We don't want you to be around to mess anything up. So he goes on vacation and he goes on a cruise to Mars. Basically a spaceship that's designed like a cruise ship is going to Mars. So it's a several-day journey, and while he's there, he finds himself in the middle of another situation where he kind of gets to use his spy abilities to help solve like a murder mystery crime. So very interesting premise there. A little confusing if you don't know what you're getting into right away, but you'll eventually get there and understand it. So before I get into my specific thoughts about this book, I thought I would develop some like baseline criteria for each of the books I'm going to read for this video to be able to compare them in somewhat of a standardized way. So I have some categories that I'm going to be rating each of these books in. I saw Elizabeth do this from Reading Riley recently when she did a trying romance books video. She had like all these different categories that she was rating books from in 1 to 5, and that helped her compare them. So when I read sci-fi books, here are the things that I like. I like a solid initial premise, something that I can get on board with, that I'm interested in, that makes me think like what I would do in that situation. Just an initial premise that's interesting. Readability. Even though I do like science in science fiction, I still like the readability to be easy and fast-paced. Characters. I'm a huge character person. Even though I do like fast-paced, interesting plots, I still want there to be good character development and good character dynamics. And then science. I do like there to be science present in my science fiction, although I do like it to be somewhat realistic and still understandable. I don't want it to go completely over my head, but I want it to be there. So those are the 4 categories that I'm going to rate for each of these books, and then I will do like an overall rating as well. So Waypoint Kangaroo, initial premise, I'm gonna give a 3. I do think it's really interesting to have like a cruise ship going to Mars setting. I thought that was really fun because they still had like the bars and the restaurants and the activities like you would on a cruise ship. The murder mystery I thought was okay. I just thought it was really weird because we weren't following this guy with his normal crew, like he was with all strangers, and they garnered trust really quickly. I found to be interesting, versus like if he was working with his normal agency, I would understand that there's history there and that's why they worked so well together. Again, versus here where he just was on this cruise on vacation and then found the authorities and was able to team up with them to solve the mystery. So overall interesting premise, nothing blowing me away, so I'm gonna give it a 3 for premise. Readability I thought was really good on this book. I'm gonna give it a 4. Again, the beginning was a little confusing just because we were setting everything up with like his powers and his agency and what he's doing on this cruise. But once you have that lay of the land, the rest of this book read really quickly. It was very fast paced and pretty easy to understand what was going on at all times. Characters. Unfortunately, I'm gonna give the characters a 2. Again, similar reasons. He didn't have former relationships with these people, which I wish he did. I think I would have believed his relationship with them more. Also, this main character kind of sucks. First of all, from the premise, you know that his own agency doesn't trust him enough to have him around when something important is going on. So like, how bad do you have to be at your job to be shipped away to another planet instead of being around for some important conversations? That tells a lot. It's really only his superpower that's keeping him like in a job. And there's kind of a romance in here, and the way our guy is talking about the female I didn't love. She is the head engineer for the entire ship, which is awesome. I love that that was her. And yet he was still talking about how he could see her curves through her like spacesuit. And on one hand, I'm like, yeah, sure, you got the point across that this main character kind of sucks, but also why does he have to suck in that way? And then I didn't really connect to any other characters. So characters, unfortunately, is a 2, which is a real bummer. And then last category, science, I'm gonna give it a 3. I think there was a lot of science talk in here, which I really liked. Most of it having to do with like the ship and the journey to Mars, I thought was really solid. I mean, obviously I don't know much about that exact type of science, so I can't say whether it was correct or done well, but it seemed good enough to me. And then there was a part where they're talking about like in the body science. That one lost me a little bit, partially because it's less physics based, which is what I enjoy, and it was more like anatomy biology based, which I don't prefer, but it was there. His superpower was kind of interesting to me, like why is he the only human ever to have this superpower? And while it did come into play later, it was never explained or anything. So I'm gonna give it a solid 3 for science. So where that lands me is an overall 3 for this book. I did enjoy it. I would recommend it specifically if either the murder mystery aspect sounds intriguing to you. Obviously I didn't go into depth into what that is because I think it's better for you to just read it and find out for yourself, just knowing that there is a murder mystery aspect. Slash, if that science piece that I was talking about sounds interesting to you, if you for some reason not only like spaceships but also like some biology stuff, then you might enjoy this. So that is book number 1, 3 stars. I also need to mention that this is book 1 in a 2-book series. I don't know that I'm going to be picking up the second book. I'm at least not going to right away. I think I'm going to see if Lisa, my friend, reads that one and what she thinks. If it's better, then I'll probably pick it up. But if it doesn't add really anything, then I'm probably good just skipping it. But that may also have to do with the rating in terms of like the character dynamics and things like that. Those totally could develop more in the second book once you've had a lot more time with all of the characters. So maybe if you're a series reader, that is attractive to you because you like the idea of having 2 books to get to know all of these characters. But with that, first book is down 3 stars. I'm okay with that. I think it leaves some room for improvement, which is always good. Sometimes it's weird to start with the best book first because then nothing lives up to it, but I still have solid hopes that I'm going to get a really good sci-fi out of this video, and I think this was a pretty solid start. So I will be back once I have finished another book and have some more ratings to go through.
Slippery surface, a heart attack. And sometimes you just gotta believe there's something that'll give you relief. There's something that'll have what you need, what you need. We're broken, it's tragic, we're not all elastic, but maybe there's magic, believe you could have it. And I know of sadness, the anxious and panic, the infinite vastness of all that is black.
Okay, you guys, hi, I finished my next book and I'm so excited to talk about it. I just finished The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer, and it was so good. Right when I finished it, I was trying to think, what am I gonna rate this book? Is it a 4? Is it a 5? And I can't think of any reasons not to rate it a 5-star. So it's a 5-star book, completely unexpected. I think I mentioned that I picked this up because my friend Gwen reminded me that Kayla from Books and Lala read this in a recent video. For some reason, I thought that Kayla didn't really like it, so I didn't keep it on my radar or anything. But I just went back and watched her video, and she also loved it and gave it 4 stars. So clearly it's a great book. So let's start with what it's about. This is about these 2 characters, Ambrose and Kodiak, and they are on this spaceship. They both wake up with no memories of the launch or anything. They know that they were supposed to be on this mission, but for some reason they can't remember taking off, and they also don't know who each other is. So they're kind of trying to get their bearings and remember what they're doing. And I think that's really all you need to know going into it, because this is a pretty twisty book, which is not super common for sci-fi, I would say, but there definitely are some pretty major reveals in here that I think are best left unsaid. It is young adult because I think they are 17 at the time of taking off, but they've been training for a long time to be on this ship, so they're kind of experts at what's going on, and they're very intelligent and behave like adults in a lot of ways. I personally don't mind young adult sci-fi. I actually find that I really like young adult sci-fi for some reason, so I had no hesitations about it. But if you're hesitant, I would say they do act like adults for the most part, and they are dealing with very adult situations. This book gets pretty dark and pretty heavy, so with that being said, I would still recommend it, even if you're not sure if you like young adult sci-fi or sci-fi in general. So let's get to my little rating system. For initial premise, I'm gonna give it a 4. And I'm only gonna give it a 4 because that's not a super original premise, to wake up on a spaceship with no memory. One of my favorite books, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, starts with our main character waking up in a spaceship with no memory, and this was written before that. But I'm sure that there are books written before this with that same premise. And I love the premise, just because it's not completely original. I'm giving it a 4. Readability, it's a 5. It's very fast paced. It's very short. Chapters, kind of, although they're not actually chapters. Let me show you what they look like. It's more like a countdown. If you can see up at the top on that page, it says tasks remaining 342, and it's counting down the number of tasks that our people have to do. And then other than that, there are just like part breaks where it'll be a couple of black pages, and there are 4 or 5-ish parts. So that's how the book is separated. It's not in typical chapters, but it reads really quickly, I guess because of that, because it's just like short countdown piece to the next short countdown piece. Characters were my favorite part of this book. I loved these 2 characters. By the end, you get to know them with such layers. You get to know so many different parts of them, and so I have to give characters a 5. I would give it more than a 5 if I could. I think that's the strongest part of this book. The science, I'm gonna give a 4. It was not overwhelming by any means. I would say this is very light on the actual science. It's much more about like the humanity of what they're doing and them as people and figuring out their own just like motivations and relationship with each other, and focus on where they're going and what they're doing. There are some like tasks on the ship that they have to do, but those are minimal. So I'm just gonna give the science a 4 because it was there, but I could have used more of it if it was my personal preference, perfect sci-fi book. But I think most people will be super happy with the amount of science that's in there. And then overall, I'm gonna give it a 5. Like I said, I have no reason in my normal rating method to not give it a 5-star. So this is a 5-star book. Does the math perfectly work out of all those categories equaling a 5? No, but this is my rating system. I'm gonna give 4s and 5s and still give it an overall 5. So this was a super pleasant surprise. I would highly recommend this to fans of sci-fi because it's very different from other space books that I've read, which is pretty cool to read, but also not fans of sci-fi because like I said, it's not super heavy or dense on the actual science. It's much more about the relationships. And I think this book will appeal to a lot of readers, not just sci-fi readers. So what a great second book. I'm excited to get into my other sci-fi books and find out how they compare, and I'll let you know when I finish another one. Let's talk about my next space book that I finished. So I just finished Holdout by Jeffrey Kluger, and actually when I say just finished, it was actually a few days ago, so I don't know why I said that, but I'm really excited to talk about it. So the premise of this book, I think there are kind of 2 different synopses I could give. First one is you're following this main character who is an astronaut. She's a female, and she is at the start of this book in the International Space Station in space. She's in a crew of 3 people, and they're just going about their normal daily work when all of a sudden something happens that causes an emergency in the space station, and they are all kind of knocked around and injured, and so they are ordered to abort their mission and come back to Earth. So all 3 of them get into their little escape pod thing, and then all of a sudden, right at the last second, our main character says, actually, no, I'm not going. She decides she's gonna stay on the space station, which is defying direct orders from her direct commander or whatever, like the guy she's with, and then also like NASA and people on Earth are all telling her, no, you have to obey orders and come to Earth, and she says no. So because it's critical condition, they get the other 2 back to Earth, and our girl is just alone up in the International Space Station. So that's the first chapter, and I didn't read any more synopsis going into this book or whatever, so when that happened, I was like, oh heck yeah, I'm really interested. Like, what is this lady doing? Why is she staying up there? Why does she defy orders? When they're trying to negotiate with her, they're telling her, like, you will never fly again, you probably won't have a job again after this. Like, you are ending your career off of this decision. You will be scorned, you'll probably do prison time. This is a huge deal. You can't just say no to NASA. And she says no. So then where the book goes from there, I do think is important to talk about, even though yes, that first chapter is so interesting, and I think that would hook a lot of people even without knowing what the rest of the book is about. I do still think that if you're not interested in the rest of the book, it would really turn you off to read it, find out that that's what it's about, and be disappointed. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what the rest of the book is about and why she's doing what she's doing. So I think I can just sum it up by saying the rest of this book is very political. Our astronaut is
taking a stand. She's basically protesting something that is going on Earth. It's something that she can see very clearly from the space station, which is interesting. She can see something happening on Earth, and she's basically using this platform that she got from refusing these orders to tell the people on Earth what's happening and what she wants to happen politically. And let me just tell you, I am so surprised that I still enjoyed this book a lot even after that, because I don't like reading about politics really. I think in recent years I've come more to terms with the fact that politics is kind of in everything and everyone should have, you know, their own viewpoints, and it's okay and good for people to talk about that and challenge each other and things like that. In general, I still don't really like to read about it in my fiction, but I think what I liked in this book is that we're following an individual who has political beliefs. We're not following like the politicians who are trying to get political things to happen. If that makes sense, I'm not sure, but that's getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go into my ratings for this book before I finish out my final thoughts. So, initial premise for Holdout. I'm gonna give it a 4. It would be a 5 if it was just that initial chapter, because again, it totally captured me, but that's not really what the premise is about. It does include that political aspect, which I still did enjoy. I don't know if I knew that that's what this book was about, if I would have expected to enjoy it so much. But with all that being said, I'm gonna give it a 4 because it was a good, unique premise. Readability of the book, I'm gonna give it a 4. The scenes in space, I just love. I love reading about astronauts solving problems in space and making their decisions. There's no time for like miscommunication or wishy-washy decision making. They just have to make a decision, go with it, and deal with the outcomes as they come. So that half of this book I loved, was an absolute 5 in readability. And then the other aspects, like the other half of the book is on Earth. I found those sections to be more like a 3, not because they were difficult to read. I just found myself a little bit bored with those sections and kind of skimming them a little bit to get back to the space portion. So balancing that out, I would give it a 4 for readability. Characters. So our main character, I really enjoyed. I really liked her like general viewpoint. I liked that she was willing to take risks, stand up for what she believed in. So again, she's probably a 5. And then we do follow some characters on Earth that were a little more like a 3. So characters, we're gonna balance it out and give it a 4. And then last but not least, science. The space science was excellent, giving it a 5. The on Earth science is more political science, obviously, but because I enjoyed it, I'm giving it a 5. The science portion. Giving it a 5, I loved all of it. If you like science, that's in here. If you like political science, that's in here. So kind of a cool mix of sciences that you don't often get in fiction books. So it's a 5, which balances out to an overall 4-star rating for this book. I'm on a really good trend of enjoying space books, so I hope that the other ones hold up. I have got 3 left, so I will be back when I have an update on another one, and fingers crossed I continue loving them. Hi you guys, my house is loud. I am sick, but I am here with another update because I have finished yet another book. I just finished Gravity by Tess Gerritsen, and you guys, I am just learning so much in this video. This book taught me that, well, let me back up. Obviously, I knew that there are different subgenres within science fiction, right? There's a ton of them. And I kind of thought that by reading space books, I was reading the subgenre, like space books or space setting is the subgenre. But I am finding now that even within space books, there are several different kinds of subgenres, and it's really interesting reading them and learning about them and learning my preferences and what I can recommend to people. It's just turning out to be really enlightening because Gravity is most definitely a sci-fi set in space, but that has a medical undertone and would be like a medical subgenre within space books, which I didn't know if that would be something I would enjoy. I didn't even know if it would ever be something I picked up, but it was a great experience. Let's talk about it. So the plot of this book is interesting. Actually, how does the book even synopsize it again? So we're following this astronaut named Emma Watson, which I still think is hilarious. And yes, it was very easy to picture Emma Watson as this main character. Highly recommend. She is set to go to the International Space Station on a regular mission. Something happens where she gets rushed up there. Like, she goes before she's supposed to go, and then something happens on the space station where all of a sudden everyone on the space station is exposed to this like bacteria or this like organism that they're not sure what it is, but it's wreaking havoc on the crew. So they are in a state of emergency trying to like combat this weird like virus thing. They don't even know what it is, let alone how to fight it, and then trying to figure out like if they can go back to Earth to be treated or what do they have to do. So it's very heavy on the like biology and the science of medical conditions and treatments and all this stuff that I have absolutely no knowledge on. I'm much more of a physical science type person than a medical science, but obviously it's way different from the sci-fi I've been reading so far and the space books even that I've read within this video. It's like completely its own thing, and I feel like each of the 4 books that I've read so far has been completely different subgenre wise. Like Waypoint Kangaroo was like a murder mystery in space. The Darkness Outside Us was more of like a contemporary, almost romance, but like self-discovery type book. Holdout was political, and Gravity is medical. That's so cool. But let's get to the category ratings for this book. So initial premise, I'm gonna give it 2 because honestly, hearing about people in space trying to fight like a microorganism is not interesting to me. Again, I have no medical background, I have no medical interest, so that's not the most intriguing premise to me. But hold on, the rest of the ratings are not bad. Readability, I'm gonna give it a 4. I did pick up the audio of this book because it was on Hoopla, and I absolutely flew through it. There are a lot of different characters in here, and there's a lot of different storylines that all end up kind of intersecting, but I didn't find it confusing at all. I can't say whether I read it physically only if I would have had the exact same experience, but I was impressed with, by only listening to the audio, I was still able to completely understand what was going on, at least from a character and plot perspective, not necessarily a medical perspective, but readability was there, so a 4. Characters, I'm also gonna give a 4, again, because there were so many of them. It's hard to say that I like equally cared about all of them and was invested in all of them, but I was really invested in Emma Watson and her husband in the story, and their kind of story together is actually more emotional than I was expecting, and I did not cry, not tear up, but like, you know, get the very start of like emotions, you know what I'm talking about, when it's like in your throat and in your nose, where it's like, oh, there's a little bit of a burning. I could cry if this went further, but that's all the further it went. But for me, that's still pretty good. So characters, I'm giving a 4, and science, I'm gonna give a 4, which again is somewhat surprising to me because a lot of the science in here was medical science, but it was, I think, like the right amount of detail to make me think that it was thought out and it was intentional and somewhat realistic. But it wasn't too much in that at no point did the author spend so much time on one idea or describing one like situation with the science that I felt like bored or needed to skim through or anything. Well, I wasn't reading, skim listen, I guess. So science was good, so giving it a 4, and overall I'm gonna rate this book 4 stars. What a surprise, you guys. It also surprised me in this book. This was written in 1999, and I was surprised at how much of the technology seemed the same in here to like the other space books that I've read. This was set mostly on the International Space Station, just like Holdout was, and they were talking about like the same things. It was really interesting to hear about like the different parts of the station and the different equipment that they would use on a daily basis and that could go wrong and things like that. It was like the same for 2 books written 20 years apart. I found that kind of amazing, and there was no, I don't know, there was really nothing that dated it. I mean, it obviously never mentioned like cell phones or anything like that, but it's not like that's astronauts' primary focus when they're in space is like texting each other, obviously. So it's not really present in the other space books either, so that's why I didn't really miss that, I guess. But I was just impressed with how this book held up. It was a wild ride. A lot of people on Goodreads I've seen classify this actually as a thriller first and foremost, more than a science fiction. I'd probably disagree with that and say it's a science fiction with a strong medical emphasis and kind of a thrilling plot. It's not like a mystery or anything, it's just thrilling. You are just along for the ride, figuring out what's going to happen to these astronauts. I will warn any readers who are interested in picking it up, it is a little bit graphic, at least to me, to someone who, again, is not medically inclined, and I don't read a lot of like horror or books about people's bodies getting destroyed. So if you do if you read a lot of body horror, maybe this will not affect you at all. Or if you're a medical student or medical professional, this probably will not affect you at all. But to me, someone who doesn't read graphic scenes like that ever, some of it was a bit much. So fair warning if you're also, I guess, sensitive to stuff like that. But overall, yet another pleasant surprise, you guys. I'm so excited to get to the last 2 books in this video to find out if they also have their own unique subgenres that I wasn't anticipating, and to just wrap up my thoughts on all of these books as a whole. Alright, you guys, I knew this video was going a little too well. I was enjoying all the books a little too much. Something had to drop, and I am hitting a major roadblock at the Apollo murders. I have read and listened to like 20% of this book, which may not sound like a lot, but it's almost 100 pages and over 3 hours of listening time. And when I tell you that the idea of listening to this book for 12 more hours and reading 350 more pages of this book fills me with so much dread, I can't even express it. I am going to do something that I almost never do, and I'm going to DNF this book. Because if somebody told me that they were feeling that way about a book, that they were feeling that much dread about finishing it, I would tell them to DNF that crap. Do not put yourself through the misery. There are so many other books to read that will fit with you better. So I'm going to take my own advice, and I'm going to DNF a book. So unfortunately, I cannot give you complete thoughts or a complete review on this book. I can tell you what I did not like about it and why I'm not going to finish it, but obviously take my review with a grain of salt. I did not finish it. This book is the most dense of all the space books I've been reading so far. I don't know what it is. All of the other books, I had a little bit of trepidation, like I was worried some of them might be a little bit dense, but they have all surprised me so far in how easy they've been to read and get into. This one is just not. This book, I wish I could tell you like fully what it's about, but from my understanding, it's about launching Apollo 18, which never happened in real life. So it's kind of like an alternate telling of history, or I guess it could be in the future, but it seems like you have to have a lot of knowledge about space history and about like the previous Apollo missions and who some of these astronauts and scientists are in order to get the full experience. And I don't have that. I don't know really anything about space history. And even I read a review on Goodreads that said the opposite. It said, like, as someone who really loves space history and knows a bunch about the Apollo launches and everything, it was really fun reading about this potential Apollo 18. And I'm like, I'm in the complete opposite boat. I don't know anything, so I feel like I'm missing a lot that's going on in here, and it doesn't feel good to feel like you don't know what's going on. There's also a whole lot of male characters in here. I'm assuming white, middle-aged men that just aren't the most interesting to read about. There's a lot of intermingled politics between like not only NASA, but the CIA and the NSA and ROTC and the different countries, like Russia's involved. And there's something in this book about Russia is like spying on the US or something like that. But again, I didn't understand the full picture. Like, I don't understand what's going on 20% into the book. Also, so far in the first 20% that I'm reading, there's not a lot going on a spaceship, but there's a lot of like airplane and helicopter flying going on, which is not what I'm reading space books for. I'm just not as interested in airplanes and helicopters as I am in spaceships. And then one thing that I don't think is considered a spoiler because it happened in the first 20% of the book, and I don't know how it plays out, granted, but it kind of bugged me. Somebody dies in their training for the mission, and everyone just like brushes by it. They're like, we're on a time crunch, we got a mission to launch, we got to find a replacement and move right along. And there was no character that was like particularly attached to that person that we could get like any emotion from. And I'm just like, what am I reading? I don't want to read a book where somebody dies and nobody cares. And again, maybe that would come later in the book, but at the moment I was just very turned off by how little emotion was in that scene. So overall, I'm not going to rate this book because I don't feel like it's fair, like on Goodreads, to actually count it as a finished book and give it a rating. But what I am going to do is give my little category ratings because this is my video and I can do whatever I want, and you know that I didn't actually finish it, so you can take these ratings with a grain of salt. So initial premise, 1 out of 5. I'm going to give it a 2, maybe a 3, like a 2.5, because the initial premise of launching Apollo 18 to stop a Russian spy, actually it doesn't sound that interesting to me. It's like a 2. It's only interesting to me because it is space, but it sounds very like action movie like, and there's nothing different about it. There's nothing compelling me to want to read a book about it, if that makes sense. Readability, giving it a 1. It was not easy to read. It was not paced well. It felt slow and dragging and long and confusing. Characters, I'm also giving a 1. Our main character is this guy named Kaz. And the first scene in this book actually was really interesting. He's flying a plane, doing like a time trial type thing, or like a time calibration type thing on the airplane, and he hits a bird and it ends up taking out one of his eyes. So that scene was very interesting and action-packed, and then we follow him after that because obviously he can't be like an astronaut after that event, after losing his eye, but he still is involved in the space program. And I'm assuming maybe in some way he ends up going to space by the end of the book. But you would think with that first scene, you would end up really caring about him and rooting for him, and I just don't. And I couldn't tell you a single other person's name in this book, so characters get a 1. Science, 1 out of 5. I have to give it a 1. Like, nothing in this book is making me want to read it, you guys. The science is not there. It's only descriptions of equipment, but not actual descriptions of science. And I'm sure it would come later when they get into whatever pickle they get into and have to be ingenuitive and solve problems and whatever when they're actually in space. I know that's where a lot of the science comes in, but in the 20% I read, there was no science. So from those category ratings, you can do what you will and make assumptions about what I would give this book overall if I were going to rate it, but I'm not gonna rate it. I'm just gonna put it down, return it to the library, and get on to the last book of this video, which I'm very excited for. I think Mickey 7 is gonna be way faster paced and more fun and an interesting plot, and also like half the size. So I'm really excited to get into that one. So I will be back with hopefully a much better demeanor and better opinions on that last book, and to wrap up this video for you. Alrighty, you guys, final update time because I have finished the final book for this video. I just finished Mickey 7, so let's talk about it. So this is the book that has the premise of we are following this guy named Mickey. He is on this space shuttle thing, and he is designated as the person who, if something happens, if somebody needs to go on a super risky mission or they need to do something that will almost certainly cause death, they send Mickey out because Mickey has uploaded himself into this machine that will clone him or create another copy of him after he has died. So Mickey 7 is the 7th iteration of this character Mickey, and the inciting event of this book is that he goes on this mission and he's presumed dead, so the crew creates another Mickey. They create Mickey 8, but Mickey 7 is actually not dead, so he makes his way back to the ship and finds out that he is a multiple. And it's a situation where he and Mickey 8 are trying to keep it a secret because they don't want everyone else to find out, because if they find out, they'll probably just kill them both and create Mickey 9. So to get into the different category ratings for this book, first of all is premise. Overall premise, I'm gonna give this a 5. I think that sounds really interesting to me. It totally has me hooked. I wanna find out, like, what are they gonna do? How are they gonna keep this a secret? When people inevitably do find out, how are they going to treat them? And then it also brings up a real, like, ethical conversation of who are you really? Like, if you can be cloned, are all of those copies actually the same person? Or is Mickey 7 an individual and is he different from Mickey 8 and all of the different Mickeys? And then it also brings up, if you can be cloned and consistently basically brought back to life, does that make you immortal? Or again, is every iteration different? So when each Mickey dies, does he actually die? Very interesting. I love all of those conversations. I love how that makes me think. So off the bat, the premise is a 5. The readability of this book, I would say it's very easy to read in that it doesn't really get dragged down by like technical talk or anything like that. It's also a very short book, so the plot does move at a pretty good pace. There are some parts in this book where it got a little confusing because we get some flashbacks about Mickey before he joined this mission and then of the former iterations of Mickey, and it became a little bit tricky to follow because it didn't spell out like 10 years earlier this happened. It was just like in the middle of normal chapters. So I found that a little bit confusing. So I'm going to give readability a 3. Characters. The characters in this book. Obviously the main character, Mickey, is the one you are supposed to be connected to. He's the one you're supposed to root for, and I didn't. The biggest reason is because Mickey is kind of dumb, and his whole thing in this book is that he's kind of a screw up in his former life. That's why he joined this mission, is because nobody else wants to be the expendable person who can get killed and cloned. So he took the job because he had nothing else to live for. He had nothing else to do. He's like, why not kill myself over and over again for this mission? So he's kind of in a rut in his life, and he's not very likable. He's not very intelligent. He just hasn't been successful. And I think that could work if he was a young character, like a teenager or in his early 20s, where it's more being naive and just like bad luck and stuff like that that's got him into his situation. But Mickey is a 39-year-old grown man, which just makes me really skeptical of him as a character and the decisions that he's made to bring him to this position. And I just didn't really feel compelled to root for him, because the whole I've been a screw up for the first 39 years of my life doesn't make me confident you're going to turn it around now. So I didn't love that. Also, he has a best friend in this book who's the worst best friend ever. He is like the reason that Mickey keeps getting killed. So you also just want to strangle the best friend and Mickey for continuing to be friends with this best friend. It's very weird. It's a very weird dynamic. So the characters I'm going to give a 2. And then science, it was in here. It tried to be in here, but again, because we are from the perspective of Mickey, who is this 39-year-old screw up, who again doesn't come off as overly intelligent, all of the science is coming from his mouth, and it makes it really hard to believe it, because it's like, you're not a scientist. Why should I believe that you actually understand what's going on with this ship and with space and even the science of like building the clones and things like that? It either just didn't sound very intelligent, or if it did sound intelligent, I didn't trust it, because I don't know why this guy would understand the science to such a deep level. So the science talk didn't really work for me either. I'm gonna give that a 2. So overall, this book, I'm gonna give it a 3. I think it sounds like I was really hating on it there for a while, and it's not that it's a bad book. I just think the humor and the character really didn't connect to me, and so that's where the disconnect was, and it was really hard to be on board with the rest of the plot. But I do think that if you do like this character and you do like relate or empathize for this screw up of a guy, you would probably have a different experience because you are rooting for him. And then again, I also did really enjoy those conversations about mortality versus immortality and what makes a person an individual. All of that was great. So it all kind of evens out. I'm gonna give it a 3-star. It was fun and it was short, so it didn't feel like a waste of time or anything. It just wasn't my favorite of the books that I read. So speaking of all the books that I read, let's talk about which ones were my favorites. Actually, let's just wrap this up in reverse order. So again, obviously my least favorite book was The Apollo Murders. Did not vibe with me. I DNF'd it. So that's gonna be my least favorite in the number 6 spot. And then from there, my ratings do jump up to 3-star. So my number 5 book, I'm gonna put Mickey 7. I think this is just gonna be the hardest for me to recommend to people because I don't know if they are going to like this main character. It's hard to know. And if you don't like him, I think that's what really makes the book not work. So I'm gonna put that in number 5. Number 4 position, we're gonna do Waypoint Kangaroo. I think that other readers probably will like this murder mystery kind of element within a space book, so I would recommend it to fans who like murder mysteries and who are okay with just like a disjointed type of story where like the main character doesn't know any of the other characters, so you're getting to know them along with the main character. If that sounds like not a problem to you, then I think you would like this. So I'm going to put it in my number 4 spot. Then, I haven't pre-thought about this. So then we jump up to 4-star books, and I think the next one I'm gonna put is Holdout in my number 3 spot. I really enjoyed it. I really did connect to this main character, so that's why I liked it so much. I surprised myself by actually enjoying the political talk in here, but I think this will be hardest to recommend because of that. It is political, but I still really enjoyed it. So that is going in the number 3 spot. Number 2 spot, we're gonna put Gravity, which is a pleasant surprise because this was not even on this original TBR, and it's an older book, but I think it still completely holds up. I, again, surprisingly liked the medical portions of this book, so if you are somebody who is in the medical field, maybe this will apply to you in particular. Warning, I think I already said, but it's kind of graphic at times with that medical talk, so if you are squeamish and don't like descriptions about things happening to people's bodies, maybe hold off, but if you can handle it, then I think you would like this book. And then my number 1 favorite out of this whole video is definitely The Darkness Outside Us. I just love this. I also think this will be the easiest to recommend to other people. I think that a lot of other people will really like this book, regardless of whether you like space books or not, and even regardless of whether you typically read YA. I think that this kind of transcends all of that and is just such a good story with such good characters that a lot of people will really like and connect with this. So that is the stack. These are the ratings and the rankings. I have to say I am surprised with how this video turned out and what my enjoyment ended up being of all of these books. In general, I think I can say that I do really like space books and I will continue reading them and seeking them out when they come out. I think I can go ahead and be less picky about like the subgenre because I never really know if I'm gonna like something until I try it, and I'm excited to have this batch of books in my arsenal now to recommend when people come to me potentially in the future for sci-fi or space book recommendations. If you are still with me, thank you very much. I hope that you got some insight and recommendations from this video if you are at all interested in space books. Please let me know what space books you have read and what you thought of them, and if you have any additional recommendations, especially taking in mind the things that I learned that I like in this video. But other than that, I don't have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.